Enter the world of the paranormal with us, here at Paranormal M. Subscribe and turn on notifications to never miss out on our latest mysterious stories. We hope you're ready to embark on a journey you won't forget. I got something or someone in a cemetery. Once upon a time, in a world filled with mystery and wonder, there lived a person who was plagued by a sinister presence that seemed to follow them wherever they went. Although the individual had always been skeptical of the supernatural, the events of the past few days left them feeling like they were caught in the middle of a horror movie. It all started when the protagonist and their family decided to pay a visit to their grandfather's grave at a local cemetery. As they wandered through the maze of crypts and corridors, the protagonist couldn't help but feel like they were being watched. Then something strange happened. They stumbled upon an old crypt with a door covered in dust, and in the dust, someone had written, "Please help," and beneath it was a huge handprint and a string of foul language. Although the protagonist was initially hesitant to investigate further, they couldn't shake the feeling that someone might need their help. As they continued walking, they noticed a crypt with a closed window that piqued their interest. However, they decided to press on, leaving the crypt behind. Suddenly, they heard a strange knocking sound coming from the crypt they had just passed. It was a peculiar sound that they couldn't quite place, and it seemed to be coming from the door of the crypt itself. Without hesitation, the protagonist began to run, their heart pounding in their chest. After that harrowing experience, the protagonist's health took a turn for the worse. They fell ill and their condition deteriorated rapidly. The events of the past days began to feel like a surreal dream, and the protagonist knew that they had lived through them. To make matters worse, they began to have nightmares. One night they dreamed of terrible things, and in their dream, they felt like something was touching their back. They woke up in a cold sweat, unsure if what they had experienced was real or just a figment of their imagination. As the days passed, the protagonist became increasingly paranoid, convinced that they had brought something home with them from the cemetery. They worried that whatever had been knocking on the crypt door might now be lurking in their home, waiting to strike. Despite their fear, the protagonists knew that they had to find out what was going on. They sought out the help of experts in the paranormal, hoping to get to the bottom of their terrifying experiences. Was it a ghost, a demon, or something even more sinister? Only time would tell now. Early 90s nightclub poltergeist. Once upon a time, during the school summer holidays, my identical twin brother and I would accompany our mother to her workplace, where she worked as a secretary for a nightclub, and it operated in a magnificent old Regency pier building located in the charming city of Southampton in the United Kingdom. As children, we'd always been fascinated with the supernatural, and even now as adults, we still find ourselves completely captivated by the unexplainable. What we experienced one day in that building would forever cement our interest in ghosts, and even now, years later, we still talk about it with great detail and enthusiasm. We would often run around the vast darkened rooms of the building, but one day, a member of the staff informed us that the cleaning crew refused to come in when it was dark because they claimed to have seen a misty, ghostly figure and felt an intense sensation of being watched. The chef told us that he'd often arrived in the morning to begin his food prep, only to discover that the cupboards were open and the pots and pans were neatly arranged in lines on the floor. Even though the alarms never went off and the cameras in the bar showed nothing unusual. Naturally, this news delighted us, and we decided to explore the kitchen, boldly asking if anyone is in here to show themselves. To our shock and amazement, some eggs on the corner flew across the room and smashed into the wall. We immediately sprinted out of the kitchen, running as fast as we could, as if our lives depended on it. We were so terrified we ran to our mother, who was just as frightened as we were when we explained what had just happened. The adults working at the nightclub tried to rationalize the strange experience, saying that perhaps a lorry had driven by and caused a vibration, and it knocked the egg off the counter, which we knew was simply not true. The building was eventually closed for an extended period, only to reopen as a Thai restaurant several years later. Through a strange coincidence, I found myself at the restaurant's opening night, and as I walked past the kitchen for the first time in 15 years, I felt a cold finger trailing down my spine, and that old sensation of being watched returned. I couldn't help but wonder if the building was still up to its old tricks with its new owners now. And the new owners were experiencing the same unexplainable phenomena that we had encountered all those years ago. The mystery of that old Regency Pier building in Southampton will always remain an enigma, and my brother and I always cherish the memory of our spooky encounter with the supernatural. The mysterious lady in a burqa. Once upon a time, in a small apartment complex located in Bangladesh, a peculiar incident happened that left the residents of the complex perplexed and terrified. The event happened years ago, but the memory of it still haunts the individuals who experienced it. The story revolves around two individuals, the protagonist's brother and aunt, who were alone at the time when the unexpected visitor came knocking at their door. Upon peeking through the peephole, they saw a lady clad in burqa, concealing her identity. This sight in itself was enough to send shivers down their spines, but what happened next was even more bizarre. The woman, who seemed determined to enter their home, started banging on the door with immense force, causing fear and panic to set in. In a state of terror, the protagonist's brother and auntie double-locked their door, hoping that the woman would eventually give up and leave. As they waited, the sound of the woman's footsteps grew fainter, indicating that she had moved to the upper floor of the apartment complex. This made no sense to the brother and auntie, as all the floors above were unoccupied, except for the 6th floor, which was owned by them. Curiosity got the better of them, and they decided to investigate the matter further. Accompanied by the building guard, they climbed to the roof, which was the only place left for the woman to go. However, to their surprise, the roof was locked, and there was no sign of the woman anywhere. This incident left the brother and aunt in a state of shock, as they were unable to come up with an explanation for what had just happened. Even more concerning was the fact that no one else in the apartment complex had seen or heard anything out of the ordinary, making the situation even more perplexing. Years have passed since this incident, and the protagonist's brother has never stopped recounting this tale to anyone who would listen. The memory of the ghostly woman in the burqa still sends chills down my spine, and he's never been able to shake it off for fear of the incident it's instilled in him. In conclusion, the story serves as a reminder of the inexplicable things that can happen in life and how our rational minds may not always have the answers. It's a tale that leaves one pondering the mysteries of the universe and the possibility of a world beyond our own. I lived in a haunted house for 28 years. Once upon a time, I resided in a home that was haunted by an abundance of spirits. According to a medium who informed me that there were occasionally as many as 20 ghosts present in the house, and it was situated right beside a cemetery, which may have played a huge role in the frequent paranormal activity that occurred within the home. As someone who's sensitive to the supernatural, I've always been able to see and hear spirits, which led to numerous spine-tingling encounters over the years. One of the most vivid experiences I had was seeing a Confederate soldier appear in my bedroom. He turned to look at me, smiled, and then vanished without a trace. It wasn't just me who had experienced strange things. Every member of my family who lived in that house also had their fair share of ghostly encounters. Some of the occurrences I personally experienced, including having my back rubbed, doorknobs turning by themselves, my foot being grabbed, hearing footsteps upstairs when no one else was home, and having items mysteriously vanish, only to reappear on the counter 6 months later. Multiple members of my family have reported seeing ominous black shadows, while others have been touched or had their names called out by disembodied voices. Even after my parents passed away, the presence was still felt within the house. They have been seen on security cameras, and the objects have moved with no one present. Despite all these unnerving experiences, I never felt truly threatened by the ghosts that co-inhabited our home. We had an unspoken agreement. They didn't bother us. We didn't bother them. Even my husband, who was initially skeptical of the supernatural, eventually became a believer after hearing footsteps in the hallway while everyone else was asleep. After so many years of living with these otherworldly inhabitants, it became a normal part of our life. People would often ask me if I was bothered by the presence of ghosts in my home, but the truth is that they became part of my everyday existence, and their presence no longer frightened me. Visitation dreams. Once upon a time, there was a peculiar and haunting story that revolved around the marriage of two individuals, M6 and their spouse. M6's husband had a close friend named Zach, who had passed away long before they had even met. Despite never having met Zach or seeing a photograph of him, M6 found himself inexplicably drawn to him in their dreams. Every December for the first 3 years of their marriage, M6 would dream about a blonde boy whom they didn't recognize. They couldn't understand why they would have such a vivid and recurring dream about this unknown individual. However, fate had a strange way of revealing the truth to M6. One day, M6's husband was going through some old high school pictures and stumbled upon some graduation photos. As they were flipping through the images, M6 suddenly recognized the blonde boy from their reoccurring dreams. Curious, they asked their husband who the boy in the photograph was, and to their utter amazement, their husband revealed that the boy's name was Zach. Not only that, but he had tragically passed away at the young age of 19, the day after Christmas. M6 was left in awe and disbelief, realizing that the boy had been dreaming about and since December was in fact the same Zach who their husband had lost so many years ago. The revelation was both eerie and comforting at the same time, as it seemed to provide a sense of closure for M6's husband and a connection with his dear friend who had passed away so young. From that day forward, M6 continued to dream about Zach every December, but the dreams took on different tones. They were no longer filled with confusion and uncertainty, but rather a sense of familiarity and comfort. The story of M6 and their connection to Zach serves as a reminder that even in death, our loved ones can continue to contact us in mysterious ways. It highlights the power of dreams and the role they can have in helping us process our emotions and experiences, even those that we might not fully understand. Hearing a ghost for the first time. It was a strange feeling, living in a house that was haunted by supernatural forces for nearly 3 decades. The unexplained events, the eerie sounds, and the inexplicable sightings had all become part of my life, and I had learned to accept them as a fact of life. But one night something happened that shook me to my core. It was a night like any other. My husband and I were having an argument, and we were both upset. We were facing away from each other, and I was having to try to calm down when I heard my name being called out. It was a faint voice, barely audible, but it was there. I assumed it was my husband, who must have been calling out to me for help. I turned around to face him and saw that he was half asleep, his eyes barely open. He looked at me and said that he had not called out to me. It was then that I realized the voice I heard was not my husband's, but something else. Something that was not of this world. I was scared and I didn't know what to do. I could feel the presence of something that I couldn't explain. I knew that it couldn't sleep in my room that night. I could feel the chill in the air and the hairs on my back started standing up. The next day, I decided to confront the presence. I stood in the middle of the room and said out loud that the only help I could give was to go into the light. I could feel the presence slowly dissipating, as if it was being absorbed by the light. The room became warmer and the chill disappeared. From that day on, I never heard any more voices, and the house felt normal again. It was as if the presence had been appeased and moved on. I was so relieved, but it also felt like a sense of loss. The house had been part of my life for so long, and now it was just another ordinary house. But I was grateful for the peace that had finally come, to the haunted house that I'd lived in for nearly 28 years. The Man in Black and Lady in White. Throughout my professional career, I had the opportunity to work in various nursing homes for an extensive period of 13 long years, during which I came across numerous spine-chilling incidents that left me with an eerie feeling. However, there was one particular phenomenon that seemed to repeat itself in every nursing home I worked at: the appearance of a man in black and a lady in white. As soon as these ominous figures made an appearance, the entire nursing home would be thrown into a state of chaos, with everyone frantically trying to count their patients as if trying to determine who might have passed away. It was as if these two figures were ominous symbols of death, and their presence was a clear indication that someone had left this world and moved on to the next. Out of all the nursing homes I worked at, there was one in particular that stood out to me. It was a place where an elderly lady had taken up residence, and she had the uncanny ability to predict death. Whenever she started singing Amazing Grace, everyone knew that it was about a matter of time before one of the residents passed away. Despite working in hospitals and nursing homes for such a long time, I'd never been able to shake off the feeling of fear and dread that these paranormal encounters left with me. To me, they were the most haunted places in the world, with their dark corners and eerie silence, making them perfect breeding grounds for the supernatural. Even to this day, I still shiver at the thought of those chilling experiences that I had during my time in the nursing homes, and the doubt that I will ever be able to forget them. My dad talking to my husband's grandma. There was a time when my husband's grandmother was suffering from a thyroid condition, which would cause her to go wonky whenever it went either high or low. I remember the night my dad passed away in 2020, and I woke up at about 4:30 a.m. to find her having a conversation with someone and cackling loudly. Being someone who could see and hear spirits, I asked her who she was talking to which she replied, "That guy." It was strange because I could never see spirits of my own family members before, and I didn't know why. However, she proceeded to describe him to me, and it turned out to be the way he looked in a picture when he was in his 20s, which was peculiar because my grandmother-in-law had only seen pictures of him right before he passed away when he was much older. I was taken back when she went on to tell me 3 stories of my teenage years that only my dad would know. The weirdest thing of all was the night before she had told me she smelled cookies baking, and my dad loved chocolate chip cookies. After much more weird behavior, she was taken to the doctors, and sure enough, her thyroid was sky high. I do believe that she was talking to my dad, especially when she told me about my 2 suicide attempts when I was a teenager, which my husband didn't even know about. Now that she's back to normal, she can't recall anything she told me that morning. Thank God. It was a bizarre experience that I'll never forget. It's made me realize that there's so much more to this world than we can see with our naked eyes. One of my paranormal stories. I have so many dating back to childhood. When I reflect upon my life, there are certain moments that stand out, moments that have shaped me into the person I am today. One such moment occurred when I was just 16 years old. It was a sleepless night, and as everyone else in the house dozed off, I felt restless and decided to take a ride in my automobile. As I cruised along the empty streets, enjoying the freedom and the solitude of the night, I never imagined what was about to happen. Suddenly, a drunken driver careened out of the parking lot and hit me with such force that my car flipped over 6 times before finally landing upside down and catching fire. I was trapped. My seatbelt jammed, and I screamed in terror. No matter how hard I tried, the seatbelt wouldn't budge, and I felt trapped and helpless as the flames licked closer and closer. And then out of nowhere, a dark-haired man appeared, a the shattered window and spoke to me in a calm and reassuring voice, telling me that he was going to cut me free and that I should slide out and run. In that moment, I felt both terrified and grateful as I realized that this stranger was my only hope of survival. I did as he instructed, sliding out of the car and running as fast as I could, only to turn back and watch in horror as the car exploded behind me. It wasn't until later, as I lay in the hospital with glass shards embedded in my head, that I began to realize the true significance of what had happened. I asked the paramedics where the man who had saved me was, only to be met with confusion and disbelief. No one had seen him, and it's as if he simply had vanished into thin air. But what baffled me the most was the fact that the seatbelt, which had been so stubborn and unyieldly just moments before, had been cut through cleanly as if by a knife. I couldn't shake the feeling that something mysterious or otherworldly had occurred. Who was that man who saved my life? And where did he come from? Was he an angel or some kind of supernatural being sent to intervene in my darkest hour? Even now, years later, I'm left with a sense of wonder and gratitude whenever I think back to that fateful night. For me, it'll always be a reminder that there are forces beyond our imagination at work in this world, that even in our darkest moments, we're never truly alone. My Son and the Ghost Girl. I must say, I have lived in a haunted house for about 28 years, and despite the unusual occurrences that took place within the walls of my humble abode, I was never bothered by them, because for the most part, the ghosts that inhabited my residence didn't seem to bother us either. It wasn't until I realized the strange connection between my neighbor and the little girl ghost that I began to piece together the story of my haunted house. My neighbor had lost his daughter years before we moved into the house. It was a tragic event that left him and his wife devastated, and I could see the pain etched on their faces every time I passed by their home. They had always known that there was a little girl ghost in our house, but we never put two and two together until one day, when my son was about 4 years old. I was in my room when I heard something hit the hallway. It hit the wall, followed by my son's voice telling someone to get out of his room. And it was just me and him in the house at the time, and I went back to his room and asked him who he was talking to. He told me that while he was playing, it was with a little girl ghost, but things had turned sour when he didn't want to play anymore. She had threatened to scare him, so he threw her out, and she threw something at him and told her he had to leave. At that moment, I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew that something was amiss, and I had to find out what it was. I went into the kitchen and called out to the little girl, saying, come out, wherever you are." To my surprise, I heard a giggle in response. I knew then that I had to be careful with what I said next. I decided to take a chance and said, "If you let us, call him Jacob's daughter, then your daddy lives in that house." After that, we no longer heard the sounds of someone playing hopscotch down the hall or the random giggle that became part of our daily lives. It was as if the little girl had finally found what she was looking for and moved on to be with her dad. Looking back, I realized that the little girl ghost must have been so young that she didn't understand that her dad had moved on and onto another realm. She must have been searching for him all these years and found solace in the fact that her dad was still close by, even though she couldn't see him. It was a bittersweet moment, but one that I'll never forget. My dad called after his death. In the year 2020, a year that would be forever etched in my memory, I lost my beloved father. The pain of his absence was overwhelming, and I missed him dearly each day. It seemed as though life had lost its color and everything was bleak without him. However, on one seemingly uneventful day, while sitting in the car, waiting for my husband to come out of a store, my cell phone suddenly started ringing. As I reached for my phone, my husband asked if I was going to answer it. I quickly glanced at the caller ID and recognized the number. But before I could even press the answer button, the phone stopped ringing. The sudden interruption left me confused and bewildered, but an inexplicable feeling began to take over me. I immediately called my mother, who lived alone, and asked if she was at home. Her reply sent a chill down my spine. No one is here. As my heart raced, a question popped into my mind. Did my dad just call me? For a moment, I couldn't comprehend what just happened. Was it a sign from him? Was he trying to tell me something? The dreams I had of him were always a source of comfort, a reminder that he's still with me in some way. But now, with my mother gone, those dreams were gone too. I was left with an unexplainable void, a sense of loss that seemed to grow with each passing day. The memory of that day still lingers in my mind, and I can't help but wonder if it was my dad trying to reach out to me and let me know that he was still with me in some way. The thought brings me comfort, and I hold on to it tightly, hoping that someday I'll be reunited with him once again. My husband swears he heard my voice, but I was gone. It was a strange and eerie experience that sends shivers down my spine when I think about it. I had gone for a couple of hours and my husband was at home waiting for me to call him so he could come and pick me up. While he was waiting, he heard something that left him baffled and confused. He swears that he heard me singing, which is something I often do while maybe doing a sink full of dishes. However, he knew I wasn't home, and he couldn't understand how my voice could be coming from the kitchen. It was a perplexing situation that left him scratching his head and wondering what was going on. To add to the misery, my 16-year-old son came upstairs and said that he thought I was home because he heard my voice a few minutes ago. This left us all dumbfounded and wondering what was happening. How could two people hear my voice when I wasn't even there? Was it a doppelganger or something else entirely? My husband would have been in the room right next to the kitchen, so he heard it as plain as day. The only reason he didn't come in there was that he was waiting on a call from me to come and get me. We were all left with the uneasy feeling that something wasn't quite right. As we tried to make some sense of what had happened, we began to explore the possibility of a supernatural explanation. Was it a ghostly apparition of me that they had seen or heard? Or was it something more sinister, like a malevolent spirit trying to trick us? Despite our best efforts, we never found an answer to what happened that day. It remains one of the most mysterious and unexplainable experiences we've ever had. Even now, years later, we still talk about it and try to make sense of it all. But in the end, we have to accept that some things are just beyond our understanding, and perhaps it's best to leave it as a mystery. Visitation dreams. Have you ever found yourself lost in the ethereal world of your visitation dream? Those inexplicable moments where the veil between reality and the unknown blurs, leaving us with more questions than answers? I certainly have, and the experiences I've had have been nothing short of surreal. It all began when my father passed away, only 10 months before my mother. During that brief span of time, I had dreams of my father frequently, always in the same room, which looked like his dream living room. He would speak of current events and share his thoughts on what was happening in the world. The dreams were so vivid that I could almost feel his presence next to me, comforting me in my time of grief. But when my mother passed away, something peculiar happened. The dreams of my father stopped instantly, as if he had left me to be with my mother. For over a year, I didn't dream of him at all. Then abruptly, I began having dreams of my mother, and in these dreams, she would tell me about current events in my life and share her wisdom and love with me. The location was always in the snow, a place she loved. I would wake up freezing as if I'd been outside in Alaska in the dead of winter for hours. The dreams were never sinister or ominous, but they did leave me with a sense of perplexity. Why won't my father come now that my mom is gone too? Is there some reason that he's not able to visit me anymore? Or is it simply that my mother is the one who needs to be with me now? questions continue to pile up with no clear answers in sight. Despite the confusion, one thing is abundantly clear to me. Even death can't sever the bond I had with my parents. The love and connection we shared in life continues to exist even beyond the grave. These dreams serve as a testament to the fact that, and maybe a reminder, that the love we have for each other transcends all boundaries, even those of life and death. As I attempt to unravel the meaning behind the dreams, I'm comforted by the knowledge that my parents are still with me, watching over me and guiding me through life. And while the dreams may be perplexing and enigmatic, the love that courses through them is undeniable, a beacon of hope in the midst of uncertainty. I lived in a haunted house for 28 years. For 28 long years of my life, I resided in a house that was considered one of the most haunted places in the entire town. The house was situated right next to a vast, eerie cemetery, which only added to the spooky aura. Every single person who had ever lived in that house had experienced something paranormal, including myself. My husband, who was initially a skeptic, eventually became a believer after living in that house for a few years. He had numerous encounters with the ghosts that dwelled within those walls, as I did, and other family members. Here are some of the most memorable experiences. Firstly, I distinctly remember seeing a Confederate soldier standing right in the front of my bedroom. He turned and smiled at me before vanishing into thin air. This experience left me feeling both amazed and frightened, as I'd never encountered anything like it before. Additionally, I, along with several other family members, witnessed black shadows moving around the house. I also recall my back being rubbed when I was crying, my foot being grabbed and my hand being rubbed, all of which were unexplainable experiences. Items would also mysteriously disappear only to reappear on the counter 6 months later. Doorknobs would turn by themselves, and we would hear people walking around upstairs, when we were alone in the house or in the basement. Moreover, I heard my name being called out multiple times, and a medium once told me that there were more than 20 ghosts present in the house at any given time. One particular ghost seemed to be very fond of me and followed me when I moved out of that house. It wasn't initially attached, but it just enjoyed being around us, so we never bothered them and they never scared us. We would often pull harmless pranks, which made it even more exciting for me, as I could see and hear spirits. It wasn't always easy living in that house, but we learned to coexist with the ghost by showing them respect and not trying to force them out. We had a mutual understanding, which allowed to share the space peacefully. I can honestly say that I've seen and heard enough paranormal activity to last maybe a lifetime. But there is even more occurrences than the ones I've mentioned in this post. One of the funniest pranks that the ghost played on us was hiding my husband's car keys every time he had to go to work early. It was a harmless prank, but it definitely added to the already spooky atmosphere of the house. All in all, my experience living in that house taught me to be open-minded and accept that there are things in this world that we may never truly understand. My husband's grandmother keeps coming to visit. The bond between a granddaughter and a grandmother is one of the most special and cherished relationships in the world. For me, that bond was even more profound because I took care of my husband's grandmother until the day she passed away, just 50 feet from where I am now. She was a kind and loving woman, and we developed a close relationship. During the time I cared for her, she always told me that when she got to the other side, she would still visit me from time to time. As someone who is partially a medium, I have proven this many times by walking up to someone I just met and calling them a nickname, only for them to say that only their dead loved one called them that. I've always been sensitive and able to see and hear things that others can't, and so it wasn't surprising when I began to notice strange things happening after she passed away. It started with my dog, who walked over to the couch where my grandmother-in-law always sat. She smelled the couch, sat down, and immediately began wagging her tail, just like she always did for Mama. Things that she used to often began to fall over, seemingly for no reason. It was as though she was still trying to communicate with us from far beyond the grave. I put on a ring that she had given me and felt someone's hand on my shoulder afterwards. I knew it was her way of letting me know that she was still with me. My husband, who's a total skeptic, has also heard her voice and laughter. Even he can't deny that something strange is happening. The other day I went to use a cup of coffee that she used all the time, only to find that the time the coffee finished brewing, the cup was back where she kept it, not where I had left it 10 minutes before. There are many more strange things that happened since she passed away. I hear her walker moving around the house, and sometimes I can even feel her presence. But despite the strangeness of it all, I take comfort in the fact that she's still with us, even if it's in a different form. Her love and kindness will always be with us, and I'm grateful for the special bond we shared, both in life and death. My mom's ex-fiancé came to visit me. When I was just 10 years old, my mother's ex-fiancé was diagnosed with lung cancer. It was a devastating blow to my mother, as she had always cared deeply for him and their relationship had ended amicably. Despite the situation, my mother was determined to make the most of the time they had left together, and she wanted us to meet him before he passed away. So we went to visit him a week before he died. Even at such a young age, I could tell that he was truly a remarkable person. Kind, generous, and full of life. Despite his illness, I could see why my mother had loved him so much. After our visit, we went home, grateful for the opportunity to spend time with him. A few nights later, my mother came to my room to tell me a heartbreaking news. He had passed away, and that night I couldn't sleep, so I went to stay at my friend's house. But as I lay in bed, I was suddenly woken by a strange feeling. When I opened my eyes, I saw him sitting at my friend's piano waving at me. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but my friend woke up and asked me who I was waving at. I didn't know what to say, so I just shrugged it off and I went back to sleep. The next day when I got home, I told my mother what had happened. To my surprise, she told me that my younger sister had seen him too, but he was standing at the end of her bed. It was such a surreal experience, and I still think about it to this day. I'm convinced that it was him visiting us from beyond the grave, but I can't help but wonder why he didn't go see my mother. Maybe he did, and she just didn't say anything. After all, my mother has always had a special sensitivity to the supernatural, as has my grandmother. Regardless of what explanations may be, the night will always be etched in my memory as a reminder of the incredible person my mother's ex-fiancé was, and how he touched our lives in ways we could never have imagined. The Old Man at the Top of My Stairs. Allow me to recount a bone-chilling tale that'll send shivers down your spine and keep you awake at night. This eerie occurrence took place several years ago, but the memory of it still haunts me to this day. I'm an 18-year-old female, and I lived in the same house for almost my entire life. My parents had bought the house when I was just a baby, unaware that it came with a supernatural presence that had taken up residence there. When my younger sister and I were between the ages of 3 and 5, we would occasionally see a ghost at the top of the stairs. It was an apparition of an old man, and he would wave to us in a friendly manner and always seemed quite gentle. We also spotted him near our bedroom doors in the evenings. At that age, I didn't remember much of it and believed that my mom was just making up stories to amuse us. But over time, I too saw him with my own eyes. One day, our next-door neighbor asked me to babysit their kids, who were all aged 3 to 6 at the time. As I was getting a snack ready for them in the kitchen, I came back to find them waving at something upstairs. I asked them what they were doing, and they both told me that they could see an old man up there. I was horrified. 2 different children who had no prior knowledge of the ghost had seen the same old man that my sister and I had seen years before. As I grew older, I came to realize that any child between the age of 3 and 6 who visits our house can see the ghost, but only once. I still can't explain why my sister and I were able to see him multiple times. Regardless, the idea of a ghost occupying our home still terrifies me to this day. The thought of a spectral entity that that had been sharing the same space with us for 3 years is enough to make my blood run cold. Despite being able to share this experience with others, the presence of the ghost continues to unsettle me. The unexplainable nature of this phenomenon and the fact that it defies all rational explanation continues to keep me on edge. The memory of the old man's friendly wave still sends shivers down my spine. Even though it's been years since I last saw him, the memory still lingers, and the thought of encountering him again fills me with dread. I saw my dead uncle, who I never met. When I was a child around 6 or 7, I had an experience that I'll never forget. My uncle had passed away recently, and my parents decided to take a trip to his grave. My younger sister and I were in the car with my dad while my mom got out to visit the grave. It was midday and the sun was shining brightly, but what happened next would send shivers down our spines. As my mom got out of the car, my sister and I saw a short old man with a top hat, black jacket, and shorts. He started playing peekaboo with us, and we were laughing uncontrollably. My dad noticed and called my mom back to the car. When she returned, both my parents asked us who we were playing with, and we innocently replied, "The man over there." And to our surprise, both my parents turned to each other, each with horrified expressions. They asked us to describe the man and what he was wearing, and we told them what we saw. To their amazement, that's exactly what my uncle was wearing when they buried him. The memory of that encounter still sends shivers down my spine. But that wasn't the end of it. Over the years, my family and I experienced more paranormal occurrences that we couldn't explain. We would hear unexplained footsteps, doors would open and close on their own, and objects would move inexplicably. We even saw apparitions of people who had passed away. These occurrences happened so frequently that we started to accept them as part of our lives. My mom in particular always had a special sensitivity to the paranormal. She would often see spirits or hear their voices, and she would relay messages to them from people who needed to hear them. One day my mom told me that my uncle had come to her in a dream and thanked her for taking care of his grave. He said that he was happy and at peace, and that he was always watching over us. It was a comforting message, and it made me feel better knowing that my uncle was still with us in some way. In conclusion, my childhood experience with my uncle's ghost was just the beginning of a lifelong journey with the paranormal. But despite the fear of uncertainty, it also brought a sense of comfort and connection to the afterlife. Devil in the ICU. Once upon a time, there was a hospital where my mother worked on the night shift. It was a place that was always bustling with activity, especially in the ICU, where the most critical patients were cared for. My mother had been working there for many years, and during that time, she had seen and heard many things that would make most people's skin crawl. One night, my mother had a patient who was an elderly woman in the final stages of her life. The woman was in a lot of pain and was crying, so my mother sat with her and held her hand to comfort her. The woman started talking about someone who was in the room with her, but my mother couldn't see anyone. The woman said that it was her husband, and that he was an evil man when he was alive, and he was still just as evil now as he was dead. My mother was confused and asked the woman to explain what she meant. The woman said that her husband had made her life a living hell when he was alive, and now on her deathbed, he had been in her room for days tormenting her. He told her that he was here to take her with him to the afterlife. The woman said that her husband had been standing in the corner of the room since she was admitted into the ICU. My mother was shocked and didn't know what to do, but she wanted to help the woman in any way she could. She offered to pray with the woman, and the woman accepted. As they prayed, my mother felt a sense of peace come over her, and the woman's crying stopped. The woman eventually passed away, but before she did, she told my mother that she no longer saw her husband, and that she was able to go in peace. This experience had a profound impact on my mother, and she never forgot it. She began to realize that there was more to life and death than what we could see and understand. She also became more aware of the spiritual realm and the fact that there are forces beyond our control that can influence our lives. My mother's experience taught her to be more compassionate and empathetic towards others, especially those that are going through difficult times. She learned that sometimes the best thing we can do for someone is to simply be there for them and offer our support and comfort. Haunted cabin. So I'm a pretty skeptical person when it comes to the paranormal, albeit having a vested interest in tales and evidence. I'm the kind of person who browses ghost hunter videos on YouTube and these kind of subreddits. I've also visited plenty of purportedly haunted locations in the United States, including but not limited to places like the Omni Park House in Boston, Molly Brown House in Denver, the Whaley House in San Diego, Alcatraz at night, and the Winchester House more than once, none of which have yielded any sort of evidence. A part of me wants to believe, but also terrified at the prospect of witnessing something. I was mostly a non-believer up until a couple of months ago. In short, I had wanted to plan a surprise party and getaway for my girlfriend's 30th birthday. She had mentioned wanting to go hit the slopes. It was January, so it's still winter at the time at this point. I organized this months ahead and had invited some of her closest friends to join. I ended up renting out an Airbnb cabin that had enough rooms to house about 10 people or 5 couples. Our entire lower floor basement level with 2 beds, a rent room on the first floor, and 3 rooms upstairs. Also adding to that, this cabin was in a beautiful rural neighborhood in Tahoe, California with tons of cabins next door. Down the street, adjacent, and etc. So there's plenty of housing around us, nothing peculiar about it. And there are other people staying around too. And of course, my girlfriend and I take the master bedroom upstairs, and right across the hall is another couple in one room. And my girlfriend's cousin by herself in the 3rd room next door. All rooms are taken. The middle floor is a lively area with games, a fireplace, and a foosball table. These details are somewhat relevant and important later on in my story. The first night was a night of merry drinking and games to celebrate the occasion. We had decorated the living area and blown up balloons to be loosely strewn around in the large and cozy living area, and the family room where we imbibed. Almost uneventful with respect to weird happenings, except toward the end of the night, balloons would randomly pop at odd intervals. Someone in our group suggested it was the balloons getting attracted towards the heater vents and popping. I was dismissive of this because not all of them had popped, and they weren't congregated near the vents. Cool, I just took note. Didn't want to argue or suggest anything was weird at this point. After we all retired for the night and all the lights were off, we could hear balloons pop downstairs at random intervals that reverberated throughout the silent house. This happened between 2 and 3:30 a.m. The next morning, still plenty of healthy balloons strewn about. Fast forward to night 2. After we returned from the snow activities, we prepped for drinking and the usual. After a full day's worth of shredding the snow, we were all collectively tired, a bit earlier than the previous night, and decided to retire around 11:30 or midnight. Here's where I personally experienced things that got me feeling irked. Since it was cold, I decided to go downstairs and turn on the thermostat. Our couple friends across the hall had their door slid slightly open, lights were on, and the bathroom was in use. As I'm going downstairs in the dark stairwell, I hear the floorboards behind me creak, and I figured it was my friend coming out to follow me for a cup of water or maybe to go to the kitchen. As I walk across the living room and stop at the thermostat, the lights are still off at this point, and the creaks continue, and then I hear it stop a few feet behind me in the kitchen. The kitchen lights don't turn on, and I hear nothing else. Feeling like it was waiting behind me and I was being watched, I said, "What's up, dude? Need something?" I turned around and no one's there. I've only ever read about this dreadful feeling of being watched, and it's indeed every bit as dreadful upon the realization in person. A minute ago, I swore someone followed me down. I was taken back, and my skeptical ass once again took note. I go back upstairs. About 30 minutes pass, and it's still cold. At this point, everyone's asleep, and I decide to turn up the thermostat a couple notches. Nothing crazy. I turn on the upstairs hallway light, bright enough to light the few steps to see from downstairs. I proceed to head down and stop once again at the thermostat. No floorboard creaks except for my own steps this time. As I'm turning up the thermostat and thinking to myself how odd the creaking was the first time, a noise broke my train of thought. I hear the ball of a foosball table several feet away near the fireplace audibly roll across its surface and hit one of the side walls. No one is around and I'm certainly too far to touch it. I froze in fear and hastily go upstairs back to sleep, not knowing how to mentally process the increasingly evident occurrences. I eventually sleep under the pretense that nothing is definitely enough for me to be conclusively sure that this cabin is haunted. I don't mention or wake up anyone about my experiences. The next morning, as we leave to drive back home, the balloons were brought up by my girlfriend's friend and couple who stayed across the hall. I took this as an opening to talk about my experiences and disclose them. At this point, my girlfriend's friend goes pale, gets serious, and tells us that the previous night, she was still wide awake when she noticed a dark figure standing at the foot of her bed. She states that she went into panic mode after blinking and realizing it wasn't a dream or a hallucination and shook her boyfriend awake, who I thought followed me downstairs earlier that night, only to have it disappear. This, by far, coupled with my experience, is undeniable evidence. I myself have wide-eyed upon hearing a solid piece of information. My girlfriend's cousin, who stayed in the room next to us, then mentions she heard what sounded like breathing in her room, but dismissed it as naturally occurring sounds of the walls in the cabin. These events stand alone could be nominal, maybe explained, but collectively it's hard to deny that something was present and amiss. I'm hoping this is the extent of my run-ins with the paranormal because I don't want to experience anything like this again. The universe has made me more of a believer. Sleep paralysis? Witnessed a lady in white sitting next to me. Let me recount for you a tale that'll leave you with chills running down your spine. It happened a few years ago when I was staying over at my grandparents' house for the night. I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night, and as I looked around the room, I saw a lady sitting in a rocking chair next to me. She appeared to be in her 90s with wrinkles etched deep into her face and an air of otherworldliness about her. To my astonishment, she was staring straight at me. I lay there sleeping. Her eyes were piercing. I could feel her gaze bear into my very soul. At first I froze, unsure of what to do. Was I dreaming, or was this a real person sitting in the chair next to me? As I lay there trying to make sense of what was happening, the lady suddenly disappeared into thin air. I was left alone in the dark with nothing but my thoughts and fears for company. My mind raced as I tried to come up with an explanation for what I had just witnessed. My grandparents' house was situated in a neighborhood with a large number of elderly residents. I wondered if perhaps the lady I had seen was a former resident who had passed away. Could it be that her spirit is still lingering in the house, unable to move on in the afterlife? The explanation left me with a profound sense of unease, and I've often wondered since. What were the lady's intentions? Was she simply observing me, or was there something more sinister at play? I've asked myself whether it was a case of sleep paralysis, where the mind wakes up before the body, leaving the person in a state of partial paralysis and hallucination. However, the experience felt too vivid and real for it to be just my imagination playing tricks on me. In the end, I'm left with more questions than answers. Was it a paranormal encounter, or was there a rational explanation for what I witnessed? Despite my fears and doubts, one thing remains clear to me. The world is a mysterious and wonderful place, full of inexplicable phenomena that may never fully be understood. My grandmother's missing necklace appeared in my bedroom days after she passed. My grandmother was diagnosed with lung cancer about 10 years ago. I was absolutely devastated as she was my favorite person on earth. She lived 3 hours away from me, so I only saw her once before she died. Before I saw her for the last time, I decided to get rid of an old, clunky jewelry box where I kept all my necklaces, which I never wear, and bought a jewelry tree instead. I went through all my pieces of jewelry, discarded stuff I didn't want, and organized the remaining pieces on the tree. During my last visit with her, I asked her where the necklace was. I was curious because she always wore it when I was a kid, but I hadn't seen it in years. Please no, I wasn't asking because I wanted it. I was just reminiscing. Not really my style anyway. She had me look all over the house in various rooms and boxes and drawers and couldn't find it. My aunt thought she may have given it to her niece and forgotten about it. Flash forward to the day of her funeral, I was getting ready in the bathroom and decided that maybe I would wear a necklace, which again I rarely do. I went to my jewelry tree, and sitting right there on the branch was the necklace. It wasn't even buried behind anything. It was right in front. Started welling up immediately and asked my husband if he had put it there. He looked at me dumbfounded and said no. I hadn't even told him about the necklace or the conversation I had with my grandmother a few weeks prior, so I believed him. To this day, I have no idea how it ended up in my jewelry. I wore it to the funeral that day, but haven't worn it since. I still have it. My aunt and dad can't explain it either. Neither were at my house in the days between us, and they wouldn't pull a stunt like that. If I hadn't just cleaned out my jewelry box, I would have just thought perhaps she gave it to me maybe long before and I'd forgotten. But there's no mistaking it. It was not there before she passed away. Slowly increasing paranormal activity. For the past 6 months, I've suspected that I was sharing a room with a ghost. At first, I chalked it up to my imagination. Then the shadow person sighting started. My bedroom has a bathroom. I keep the doors closed to it because there's a light in the restroom that comes on at night. It's dim unless your night eyes are active. It was cold in the bathroom one night, so I had the door open so the heat in my bedroom would warm it up. I'm reading a book when I think I saw movement in the corner of my eye. The light on my nightstand was on, so the light in the bathroom wasn't active, so I chalked it up to maybe the light flickering. A week later, it's another cold night, and I have the bathroom door open. All the lights are out, so the dim light inside the bathroom is on. The only other light source is my tablet. I spot something dark move at the edge of the bathroom door frame, and then the normal bathroom light flicks on for a second. The normal light is linked to some sort of fan that buzzes loudly in the ceiling. I hear it pop on for a very short moment and the light flickers. Now things are being moved around my room. I've woken up from a deep sleep to find the bathroom door open, the mini fridge open, and the microwave door open. I felt watched on one occasion. Occasionally, when I do use the restroom, I'll notice the shower curtain is closed, even though I only close it while taking a shower, and when I'm not using the shower, the curtain stays open. It hasn't shown any hostility towards me. It seems to just want me to know it's there. Lately, it's taken up a habit of hiding my phone or wallet. I look everywhere for them only to find it's in a spot I've checked several times before. My earliest experience with the paranormal. As I reminisce about my childhood, a particular memory comes to mind. It was when I was just a young boy, barely 6 or 7. I used to visit my aunt quite often, and I relished the time I spent at her place. She had a beautiful backyard with bunnies hopping around, and her food was simply delightful. One night, as I lay in bed, I had a dream so strange that it woke me up abruptly. In this dream, I saw myself sleeping peacefully from outside the window. It was a surreal experience, to say the least. When I opened my eyes, I couldn't help but check if there was anything unusual outside the window, and of course, there was nothing. However, I sensed something strange in the room with me. I couldn't see anything clearly, but I felt a presence, and it seemed to be focused on the bed. As I moved my gaze towards the bed, I noticed a shadow in it. At first, I thought it was my shadow, but it wasn't moving when I waved my arm around. Instead, it started mimicking my movements, as if it was trying to communicate with me. As I watched in wonder, the shadow started messing up its hair, and to my surprise, feathers started falling out of it. I couldn't believe my eyes. It was a shadow creature. The shadow creature seemed to have noticed my presence and started copying my movements. It was like having a friend in the room with me, even though it was a shadow creature. After a few minutes of this peculiar interaction, the shadow creature finally dissolved into the bed. I couldn't help but feel the sense of mixed relief and awe. I had heard stories about shadow creatures and how terrifying they can be, but I had experienced something completely different. As I grew older, I still thought about that night often. I realized that sometimes the things that scare us the most can turn out to be friendly after all. My encounter with the shadow creature was a reminder that we should always keep an open eye and embrace the unknown with curiosity and wonder.